All right. Looks like we are live. Hello, everybody. Chuck Holton here. How's it going for you this weekend? I hope you're having a good weekend. I had a great time tonight going to an American-style barbecue here in Armenia. It was put on by a team of YWAM people that are friends of my son and his wife. And we went out and had watermelon, hot dogs, watermelon, hamburgers, some more watermelon, chicken, potato salad, and some more watermelon. And it was excellent. It was fantastic. And it felt almost like home. We had 80s music going on. It was great. Bunch of people there. We played cornhole, which the Armenians find very curious, and pin the tail on the donkey, of all things, which they find even more curious. So, when you live overseas, getting a chance to experience America, even for just a few hours, is something to be sought after. So, expats typically, wherever they are in the world, get together for things just like that, summer barbecues and Thanksgiving. We do that in Panama as well. So thank you very much for being on with us today. Please give me a shout in the chat here and let me know where you're watching from, because we love to see all the places around the world. No, watermelon is not a code word for something. We ate lots and lots of watermelon. My daughter-in-law is waiting patiently to give birth to her baby, and she's starting to get dilated, and her body's going, all right, let's get this over with. But I've never seen anybody put away so much watermelon. So she likes watermelon. She's sitting right over there. So thank you for, wow, Uruguay, South Carolina, Florida, Alabama. And I don't know about you, but we put salt on our watermelon. That's the way it's done where my wife comes from. I never did that until I met her, but I kind of like it too. So today we're going to talk about nuclear brinksmanship that's going on between the United States and Russia. And so I'll just give you a quick rundown on what is actually going on here. So August 1st, President Trump ordered the military to position 2 nuclear subs in what he called the appropriate regions. That would be probably closer to the shores of Russia in the Atlantic. Atlantic or Pacific? Pacific. In the Pacific. And he did that because of some highly provocative statements, he called them, from Medvedev, former president of Russia, Medvedev. He made these statements because of Trump's tariffs. So here's, I'm going to start by just reading between the lines a little bit. President Trump is finally getting on board with what it's going to take to defeat Russia, to bring about, and not just an end, a stop to the fighting between Ukraine and Russia, but an actual just conclusion to the war. We don't want just to stop the killing. We want to stop the killing in a just and equitable way by the aggressor, in this case Russia, losing the war and Ukraine surviving. That's what winning looks like to Ukraine. Ukraine gets to survive as a country, because if Russia wins, Ukraine will be no more. And there are a lot of Ukrainians who are not on board with that plan. So President Trump started out trying to negotiate. That didn't work very well, because Vladimir Putin has no interest in negotiating or stopping the war. He actually believes that Russia is winning. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, nobody dares tell Vladimir Putin anything that's bad news. So all of his generals, and they've done this since the beginning of the war, and it's been proven time and again to the point where even Putin knows that he's having smoke blown at him, but his generals will just kind of spin whatever happens on the battlefield in the best possible light. So we're not retreating, we are advancing to the north or advancing in a different direction. We are consolidating our gains, things like that, using spin, for lack of a better term, to make it sound like the conditions on the ground are much better than they actually are. Now, we've got some clues that the Russian people are also getting the same spin. And I'm going to show you some of that here tonight. Because, of course, in Russia, your media choices are limited pretty much to Russian state media and Russian mill bloggers, who they have a little more freedom to criticize things or to ask questions about things than the actual news media does, but they also could disappear along with their whole family if they get too skippy about declaring that Russia's losing or something like that. So all that to say, you can't trust the news that's coming out of Russia. And the Russian people don't have any other news to look at. So the Russian people believe the spin because that's all they're given. And some of the data that's been put out by President Trump lately and been put out in a forum that would allow people in Russia to actually hear it, President Trump is saying things that everybody in the Western world knows is true, but people in Russia have never heard, and they are livid. They think President Trump's just making this stuff up out of whole cloth, and they are extremely angry about that. So that anger manifested itself in Medvedev tweeting out this, because President Trump said he's going to reduce the amount of time from 50 days to maybe 10 before secondary sanctions go into place on Russia. And Medvedev said Trump's playing the ultimatum game with Russia, 50 days or 10. He should remember two things. Number one, Russia isn't Israel or even Iran. I'm not sure what that actually means. Number two, each new ultimatum is a threat and a step towards war, not between Russia and Ukraine, but with his own country. A step towards war with his own country. Okay, I think that was poorly written. We'll give Medvedev the benefit of the doubt there because he doesn't speak English as a first language. But with his own country would mean President Trump is taking a step towards war with America. And okay, whatever. So what he means is between Russia and America. And then he says, don't go down the Sleepy Joe road. So he's taunting President Trump here, saying that by going hard against Russia, by taking a hard stance against Russia, he's going down the road of Sleepy Joe. Well, President Trump didn't like that one bit. And so he tweeted out, I made it too big. Hang on, let me make it smaller. He tweeted this out, and we can get rid of me. I don't need to be there. Based on the highly provocative statements of the former president of Russia, Dmitry Medvedev, who's now the deputy chairman of the Security Council of the Russian Federation, I have ordered 2 nuclear submarines to be positioned in the appropriate regions, just in case these foolish and inflammatory statements are more than just that. Words are very important and can often lead to unintended consequences. I hope this will not be one of those instances. And then signs off with his typical "thank you for your attention to this matter," which I think is weird, but okay, we'll take it. Now, President Trump was also asked about this today as he was leaving the White House, and we have some sound of what of how he answered them. So take a listen.
Submarines. Oh yeah, well, we had to do that. We just have to be careful. And a threat was made, and we didn't think it was appropriate, so I have to be very careful. So I do that on the basis of safety for our people. A threat was made by a former president of Russia, and we're going to protect our people.
Mr. President, can you give us any more information on the nuclear subs? And what did Medvedev say to you that made you really mad?
Well, you just have to read what he said. He was talking about nuclear. When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we're totally prepared.
Did you talk to Steve Witkoff today from his journey to Gaza? Did you talk to Steve Witkoff?
I did. I spoke to Steve Witkoff. We had a great meeting with a lot of people, and the primary meeting was on food. And he also had some other conversations that I'll tell you about later, but he had a meeting on getting the people fed, and that's what we want. And I'll see you later on. Well, I understand India no longer is going to be buying oil from Russia. That's what I heard. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's a good step. We'll see what happens, okay?
So President Trump says basically out of an abundance of caution, we're going to relocate a couple of our nuclear capable subs. These are now, some people are saying, well, maybe he was just talking about nuclear powered subs, but that wouldn't make any sense at all. He's talking about subs that carry nuclear missiles. And then he goes on to talk about Gaza a little bit. It seems like he's coming around on both the Israeli and the Ukrainian conflicts, coming to a better understanding of what's going on and what's going to have to be, what's going to have to happen to bring these to a conclusion. On Telegram, Medvedev came out and said that Russia is doing everything right and will continue along its own path. And he alluded to Russia's dead hand system, which the dead hand is basically saying, if you nuke us, we have a system in place that will nuke you back, even if we've been destroyed, even if there's a decapitation strike on Russia. That's a threat, but we're going to talk about how likely that threat is in a little while. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, okay? So now Marco Rubio came out and speaking about Medvedev said, well, he's not a relevant decision maker, but he is a provocateur, and his words mean things, you know, and you can't ignore what he said. So yesterday, Vladimir Putin sat down with Igor Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. It was a kind of a weird interview where they're sitting on a bench in a park somewhere. And Lukashenko says, Trump must act carefully. You cannot dictate the rules, especially to a nuclear power. Well, but you can dictate to the people who do business with the nuclear power. And we have been dictating the rules to Russia in the form of sanctions and tariffs and things like that since the beginning of the war. But things are getting tighter and tighter, squeezing Russia. And the reason that they got really upset about these new tariffs that Trump is talking about is that Trump threatened to put massive tariffs on the countries who have been buying discount oil from Russia, which are India and China, among others. And India, for a bit, stopped buying oil from Russia altogether. Now, Russia had a bunch of ships full of oil that were burning holes, you know, just creating hot water out there in the ocean right off the shore of India, and were not going into dock. There were some reports today that some of those ships did go in, and India has continued in a limited amount to refine oil from Russia. But if, look, India obviously does not want these massive tariffs. It would cost India a lot more in terms of their economy than they are saving by buying oil at a discount from Russia. So it doesn't make business sense for India to do that anymore if President Trump's going to follow through on these sanctions. And we haven't heard a lot from China about sanctions on them, other than them coming out and saying, well, this is irresponsible. But obviously, you wouldn't expect them to be happy about additional sanctions put on them. But this is the right way to go, to really start to knuckle down on Russia, to do whatever it takes to stop buying Russian oil, both in Europe, because they're still buying Russian oil in Europe, even though they keep saying they're under an existential threat from Europe, but they're buying oil from Europe and giving them money to prosecute this war against Ukraine. And that's because Europeans were incredibly stupid and shut down all their coal-fired power plants, shut down all their natural gas fertilizer plants, and things like that in the name of climate change. And now they're kind of stuck. They need oil to heat their homes in the winter and stuff like that, but they got rid of their own capability to provide power for heat and stuff. And they've been buying a lot more from Azerbaijan, as I reported the other day. But Azerbaijan has been laundering oil through Russia and natural gas. So they get it from Russia at a discount and then send it on through their pipelines to Europe, pretending that it's actually oil from Azerbaijan, but it's not. And that the Trump administration is trying to crack down on that now too. But that is the way to defeat Russia. Look, Russia obviously does not care about casualties. We'll get into casualty figures in just a second. And they have millions of men to throw at the war. And they can't afford to stop the war, because if they do, their economy will collapse. They're fully mobilized right now in terms of a wartime economy. And that superheats the economy because you're cranking out stuff and the government's just paying for it with debt. But you stop doing that, then the debt comes due and they got to pay it back. And then you got all these soldiers that are coming home from the war that are out of work, and all the industries are shutting down that were supporting the war, and things get really ugly really fast for Russia. Especially if that is not, if the war ends and the sanctions are not lifted. So the way to win this war, the way to bring it to a just conclusion, is to economically crush Russia to the point where they just cannot sustain their economy anymore. That would be the easier method and much less bloody than pushing, continuing the war the way that it's been going. Now, Russia has really ramped up its use of suicide drones and missiles on Ukrainian cities over the past month. As a matter of fact, the reports are that Russia has fired more than 6,400 missiles and drones just in the last 30 days alone at Ukrainian cities. Now, about 2/3 of those end up getting shot down, so about 1/3 of them strike targets, but they're not striking military targets. I have not heard of a military target. Well, I saw a bridge that got taken out in Kherson a couple days ago, so I guess that would be considered a military target, but it's also critical infrastructure. Russia has been aiming mostly at civilian areas, and they've really been focusing on Kyiv. So Kyiv has been under nightly rocket and drone attack all night long. Hundreds of missiles and drones. Most of them are shot down, but some of them strike. And those that do strike usually are striking apartment buildings So you're having somewhere around between 5 and 35 casualties every day in Ukraine from these Russian attacks. And that's horrific. But the thing is, if you do the math, that is not a winning strategy for Russia. Because number one, it shows the people there's no end to this except to defeat Russia. It actually maintains the morale of the Ukrainians in a way, because they see that we can't give up. Russia is just going to kill us all. There are actually Russian pundits who are calling for the annihilation of the Ukrainian people, genociding the Ukrainian people. They're saying we can't leave anybody alive in Ukraine. But if they're, let's just say they're killing 50 people a day. There are 4 million people just in Kyiv alone. We're not talking about the whole country. We're talking about just the city of Kyiv. And they're not killing 50 people a day. There has not yet been a strike that's killed 50 people in a day that I can remember. But let's just give them the benefit of the doubt and say they're killing 50 people a day. It would take 80,000 days. So that would be 219 years to just kill all the people in Kyiv, much less the rest of the country, at the rate that Russia is going. Now, on the other hand, Russia is losing soldiers big time. And that makes sense, because you have to understand that because Russia is on the offensive here, then Russia is going to lose more men because it's more costly to attack than it is to defend. And Russia uses old Soviet tactics, which are, do not put any value on the individual. So they're just sending wave after wave of people in to get slaughtered. Whereas Ukraine has transferred their thinking over to more of a Western mindset, which puts a very high price on people's lives. That's one of the reasons why you're seeing the Ukrainians slowly retreat. Okay. And a lot of people look at that and they say, well, then obviously Ukraine is losing because they're retreating step by step over the past year and a half. And that's not actually the case, because when Ukraine retreats, what they do is they go and, let's see here. What they do is they go and build new revetments, new fighting positions behind their lines, and then they pull back to those new ones, and they mine the heck out of everything between them and their old positions, and set up claymores and set up landmines and everything. And so now what Russia has to do is they have to cross this no man's land between the old Ukrainian positions and the new Ukrainian positions. And that is going to be very costly in terms of lives and materiel. And we've seen this play out over the last few, year and a half, that Ukraine has started to transition to this strategy of, we're going to give up small increments of our nation, because it's costing Russia more than 100 dead troops for every kilometer of ground, every square kilometer that they are able to take over. And Ukraine's looking at how much land they have and saying, well, at that rate, it would cost Russia about 5 million troops, and it would take them more than 100 years at the rate they're going to take all of Ukraine. So we'll just continue this war of attrition, and try to save as many Ukrainian lives as possible, and then try to make it as costly as possible for the Russians. And once in a while, when the Russians get too close to a important city, like the city of Sumy, matter of fact, let's look at the map here. So if we go to this map, this is from War Mapper. I'm going to zoom in here. Let's see here if I can zoom in on this. That's I have to move it around so you can see it. Sorry. There we go. Okay. So if you look here along the front lines, the purple areas are areas that Russia held before the war started in 2022. The red areas are areas that Russia has taken since the war started. And up here in the north, let's see here. We'll go up this way and zoom in a little bit. So you see Kyiv, and let's see if you can, you see Sumy here. The Russians had pushed in and had started to encroach on Sumy, which is a fair-sized city. And so then the Ukrainians pushed a bunch of troops over there and pushed them back out. They've done the same thing around here coming in close to Kharkiv. They've made gains in here, and then they've been pushed back out by the Ukrainians. So if we go to, there's another here on War Mapper. We go up here to their control data, and we look at this graph. Okay, this graph says it all. Make sure you can see that okay. I need to make it smaller. Okay, little smaller. All right, there we go. Okay, so this graph, you see the purple is what Russia held before the war. The red is what they held, what they hold now. And the higher you go, so this is the beginning of the war up here in 2022. Russia took over a bunch of land, and then they started losing ground. And then as we go down here, they started gaining it back. But look down here. I mean, you can see that there are some very incremental gains here. But this shows what they have to take over if they're going to take the whole country. And you can see that basically since, what's that, about September of 2022 or November of 2022, Russia's gains have been so incremental as to be almost unnoticeable. However, in that time, Russia has taken over 1 million casualties. Now, you might not believe that. There are some people who just, they say, no, there's no way. But there are at least 3 open source intelligence or third nation intelligence services that have come up with very, very similar numbers looking at, real intelligence about what's happening on the ground. And all of them pretty much agree. Russia has taken 100,000 dead this year alone. In 2025, so far, Russia has lost 100,000 men dead and 250,000 total casualties. So 150,000 of those would be wounded, missing, or captured. Now, that sounds to me, I mean, holy cow. The United States lost in all of World War II, what, like 450,000 men? Russia's lost 100,000 in 8 months? What? I mean, that's insane. And this is, again, this is not coming from the Ukrainians. This is coming from the UK and from open source intelligence organizations that are all looking at this independently and coming up with these numbers on their own. And they're all coming up with pretty much the same numbers. Now, again, it makes sense that Russia would lose a lot of men because they're on the attack. Ukraine has lost something like 9,000 to 13,000 men so far this year. And that's a tragedy for sure. But compared to 100,000 on the part of Russia, that Russia lost 20,000 dead in the last 30 days. President Trump said that himself. I mean, that's just mind-boggling. The scale and the scope of the death and destruction that Russia is visiting on itself is just mind-boggling. And it pains me to even think about the mothers and the families of all those soldiers on both sides, to say nothing of the innocent civilians on the side of the Ukrainians who are dying every day. Babies and women and old people just sleeping in their beds at night and getting smoked by a missile coming from Russia. And I think that finally Americans who, for a while there, a lot of conservative Americans were just vehemently against Ukraine. If you're still in that camp, you need to get with the program here. A lot of American conservatives have started to figure out that, oh, Russia isn't actually the good guy here. No, they're not. Now, Dan Steely says there are 2.4 million more Russian soldiers, not under arms. They could come up maybe eventually with 2.4 million by mobilizing every military-age male in the country. They are having a very hard time mobilizing Russians at this point because they've run out of many of the cannon fodder Russians who come from, Russia is two countries. They have third world Russia and first world Russia. And they've been pulling their troops from third world Russia very heavily throughout this entire war. And they've emptied out their prisons and done everything like that. They've even kidnapped Ukrainian children and put them in uniform and sent them to the front lines to fight against their own people. On top of that, Russia has decided, it's probably cheaper in the long run to just buy troops from North Korea, because Kim Jong-un doesn't care about his guys. So he'll sell his troops and with no expectation of their ever coming home again. Doesn't bother him one bit, as long as he gets something in return from Russia. And so now there have been at least 20,000 North Korean troops that have come into the fight, and probably half of those are dead or captured. And so, but why is Russia doing that? Well, it's not that they don't have men in Russia, but it's that it's far more costly for them to mobilize those men, because they're getting into first world Russians now. And those first world Russians, their families demand a large payout if they get killed and a large bonus to get them into the military. And so it's costing Russia, 5 times the normal salary for each soldier that they're mobilizing from Russia. So just from an economic standpoint, it's cheaper to buy soldiers from elsewhere. Now, all of that said, Russia is going to run out of money before they run out of people. And we can hasten that by doing things that cause the price of oil to go down, as in opening up drilling in the United States, turn the spigots on full bore. And that's actually been working. So oil prices have been dipping lately. Russia was kind of hoping that they would spike when the war started between Israel and Iran. That actually didn't happen. Why? Because Iran did not close the Strait of Hormuz, because China told them not to. China needs all that oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz, and they can't live without it. So while the Iranians threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, they didn't actually do it. And that did not go well for Russia because then oil futures actually dropped. Thank you, PC. Very kind of you. And I saw somebody else, KP1, or no, Colonel Oz. Thank you. Colonel Oz says, how do we as Christians, conservatives, raise awareness about the genocides in Congo against Nigerian Christians, Rojava, Kosovo, against Serb Christians and churches, and Sudan? Where's the media? Well, I talked about that the other day, Kamal, just that, number one, Americans just don't care about those little brown people down there somewhere. And so when the media does report on it, nobody watches it. It doesn't get any play. And if you're in the media and you're saying, well, I can report on this and actually make a paycheck, or I can report on this and get fired or go broke, well, they're going to report on the thing that people want to hear about. So I wouldn't blame the media for not reporting on it. I would blame the people for not wanting to hear reporting on it. Because if you want to hear reporting on it, you can go find it. There is reporting out there on those things. If you want me to report on it, I'd be happy to do so. And we'll probably work out a trip to Africa sometime soon. But so far, my schedule has been pretty busy this year. Pretty busy. I'm really busy until October, mid to late October at this point. Okay, folks, we got over 2,000 people watching. Thank you very much for being here. Please go hit the like button, and again, tell us where you're watching from here in the chat. Also, you're going to want to go over to chuckholton.com because we're putting a lot of extra content up there. We're doing giveaways and all kinds of fun stuff over there. If you are a supporter on the Hot Zone on chuckholton.com, you get early access to some of our videos and to some of our articles and all sorts of, our trips that we take, the tours that we run. So you're going to want to be, if you want to support us, that's a good place to do it. Just go to chuckholton.com and sign up as a supporter. Toss me $9 a month and you'll be happy you did. We're going to do everything we can to make you happy. Thank you for hitting that like button, all of you. It's amazing. I always forget to do it. And you guys are really good about it, many of you. So now I want to go on to what Russian media is saying about all this. Now, I pulled up this off of RT, and actually we can go look at it on the actual website, .com, rt.com over here. Basically, RT exists to spin propaganda for the Russian government. So if you go, it's interesting and instructive sometimes to go over there and take a look at RT. Here's what the website looks like. Right now, they're posting up here on the top that there's riots in a Ukrainian city against forced mobilization. That may or may not be the case. Again, you have to take all this with a grain of salt. Republicans post photo of Trump with a Lada. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. He says that the Republicans mistook the Lada for a great American car. I don't think that's true, because look, I know we've got some very, very stupid politicians. As I've said many times, we have the evil party and the stupid party, and the Republicans are the stupid party. So, there are some stupid Republicans and some very stupid Democrats as well in Congress. And it wouldn't surprise me if one of them mistook a Lada for a great American car. But the Lada is one of the worst cars ever made. And it's one of two major car dealers in Russia, or car makes that are made in Russia. Of course, there are tons of Ladas here in Armenia. And everybody will tell you it's the worst car ever made. I mean, everybody, people that own them, people that don't own them. If you mention, hey, look, there goes a Lada, they'll say, It's the worst car ever made. They're cheap and they're simple. And the good thing about them is that everybody in any village in the whole of the former Soviet Union, every man knows how to fix a Lada. Why? Because they break down all the time. I actually tried to rent a Lada on this trip when I came to Armenia this time, because the place where I rent cars had a brand new one sitting there. Brand new Lada Niva, which is their version of a Jeep. And I was like, oh man, let me rent that thing. And the guy goes, no, it's the worst car ever made. Don't rent that one. I said, but that one's brand new. It won't break down. And he goes, it doesn't matter. If it's new or 50 years old, it'll break down. I promise. He said, just don't, I don't want to have to come get you when you break down on the side of the road. So I'm not going to rent you that car. So anyway, I don't know what that is about them saying that Republicans are posting photos of a Lada. What interests me is this article here: no defense against Russia's Oreshnik missile, according to an ex-Pentagon analyst. Now, understand, this is in English. This is English RT. There is a Russian RT, but this is English RT. And the articles that they put on English RT are meant for an American audience. So this is aimed at those American conservatives who still think Russia is in the right in this war, who still think, you know, Russia's got it going on and likely could win. A lot of them are reading these English articles. Now let's talk about the Oreshnik missile for a minute. We'll go back over here to the camera. So Russia's Oreshnik missiles are, that's Russian for hazel tree, actually. Oreshnik, that's what it means. They're also known as a Grau SM-729. The NATO calls it the SSX-34. It's a Russian intermediate range ballistic missile, and it's reportedly hypersonic. Russia claims it can reach Mach 10 or even Mach 11, which is, it gives it a range of up to 5,500 kilometers. So over 1,000 miles. That enables it to strike any place in Europe and actually some parts of the United States even. Now, it has a multiple independent reentry vehicle configuration of its warheads. So it carries 6 warheads on each missile, and each of those warheads can be independently targetable. So as it comes in on its terminal phase toward the target, these warheads split off and strike different places. Now, this thing's been around for some time, but it saw its first combat use. It's only ever been used in combat one time, and that was against Ukraine in November of 2024. They struck what they say was a missile plant in Dnipro, right in the center of the country. And you might remember that because it made a lot of news at the time, because it looked like multiple strikes of bolts of lightning going flow, 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 coming in and hitting in Dnipro. Very, very fast. And as it turned out, none of those munitions had any explosive in it. They were just inert munitions. So Russia fired this Oreshnik missile basically as political theater. I don't think anybody was killed in that attack. It destroyed a warehouse, put a bunch of holes in the roof. But, you know, I get this. This was Russia threatening not Ukraine, but the West, and saying, hey, this is what it would look like if we strike you with our Oreshnik missiles. Now, the scary thing about the Oreshnik is that it apparently can carry nuclear warheads. And the problem is when they get fired from Russia, you've got about 5 minutes if you're in Ukraine before that thing strikes. And in that 5 minutes, you've got to figure out, is that a nuclear missile or not? And there's no way to tell. So the real issue here is, if they ever fire an Oreshnik missile at the United States, the U.S. obviously would have a lot longer flight time, maybe 30 minutes of warning before it actually hit the West Coast, or the East Coast, or West Coast, sorry, hit the West Coast. So in that time, there's no way for the United States to tell whether or not that thing's carrying nuclear missiles. And if it is, it could easily wipe out most of the Western seaboard with 6 big nuclear missiles. And so the United States would be forced to respond in kind without knowing, respond with nuclear force without knowing for sure whether or not Russia was firing a nuclear missile at us or not. This gives us, puts us in a dilemma. We either hold off and wait to see if millions of Americans die in a nuclear holocaust before we fire back at Russia, or we immediately fire back at Russia with nuclear force, and we smoke the entirety of that country. Every major population center in that country would be gone, and tens of millions of people would die. So I think this shows why Russia is not likely to use an Oreshnik missile on the United States. They're not likely to use a nuclear missile on anybody. And I'm going to talk more about that in just a second. So the United States, by comparison, has a tremendous number of nuclear missiles. The 2 nuclear submarines, we actually have 14 boomers, they call them. They're Ohio-class submarines. And each of those 14 submarines is capable of launching 20 Trident II D5 missiles. Each one of those missiles carries up to 8 multiple independent reentry vehicle warheads. And so one submarine can deliver up to 160 warheads, which would total over 38 megatons of power. Now, that would one of those submarines can fire enough warheads to decimate dozens of Russian cities: Moscow, St. Petersburg, Vladivostok, every place, okay? And to make large swaths of Russia uninhabitable. That's one of those submarines. And we've got 14 of them. Russia can't hit them all. They don't know where they are. That's one of the great things about submarines. Russia won't know where they are until they come up and start shooting at you. And we've got enough firepower on one of those submarines to defeat Russia in a nuclear contest. But we have enough to defeat them 14 times over. And that is the foundation of the United States mutually assured destruction, which would, by ensuring a guaranteed retaliatory strike, we keep Russia from actually, striking with a nuclear warhead. Now, what are the chances? What is the actual likelihood that Russia would ever use a nuclear munition in any way, shape, or form on Ukraine, on NATO, or on the United States? What are the chances So I tried to game this out a little bit. And what I found was there is a very low chance, but not no chance, that Russia would do so. Okay? I mean, I would estimate between 1 and 5% chance that Russia gets to a point where they actually use a nuclear weapon. If they did that, it would likely be a tactical nuke, a small nuke, a suitcase nuke, and it would be in Ukraine somewhere, hoping to get the world to back off. But if they do that, they break what's called the nuclear taboo. And that nuclear taboo has existed since World War II. The nuclear taboo is if one, now that so many people have nuclear weapons, so many countries, if one country uses that weapon, uses a nuke, then all the countries will feel emboldened to use a nuke. And you're basically opening Pandora's box. And Russia knows this. Vladimir Putin might be crazy, but he's not stupid. He knows this. He knows that if he launches a nuclear strike in any way, there's a real good chance he might as well launch nukes, those nukes on his own country, because his own country is going to get vaporized. That is the concept of mutually assured destruction. And so it doesn't matter if the Russians have a missile that we can't shoot down. Now, we don't exactly know whether or not we can shoot down Oreshnik missiles, because there's only ever been one of them fired and nobody tried to shoot it down. They are expensive, they're tough to maintain, and Russia has a very limited number of those things. So even if they have something that goes Mach 20, Mach 100, doesn't matter. If they use it, and even if it doesn't have a nuclear warhead in it, if they fire one of those things at the United States, the US will respond as if there's a nuclear weapon coming their way. And Russia will be vaporized. So the Russians are lashing out. They always talk about, they always threaten nuclear war when something happens that they are very upset about. And what they're very upset about is that the tariffs that President Trump announced on Russia are already having an effect on their bottom line. And they know that that's their weak point. They know that if they lose economically, they lose the war. They won't be able to sustain the fight. Okay? Now, I know there's some questions. I want to get to answer those. But before I do that, I just have one other thing I want to show you, which is very strange. Let me see if I have it. I know I put it in here somewhere. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can figure it out where. Not that one, not that one, not that one. Okay. Okay, well, I'll show you here. This is incredible. And this just happened in Russia today. This doesn't have anything to do with the war. It's just some ridiculous footage that I thought you should see. So check this out. Whoop. Okay, what'd I do with it now? Let's try this. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay. This is a mud slide, a mud flow that covered a Russian city today. Look at this mud. Holy cow. We're not talking about I guess you could call that a landslide. But look, it's just coming down the street here. That is going to take some cleaning up. That's not good. That's really ugly right there. So I just thought you'd like to see that. Holy cow. Muddy, muddy, muddy. Okay, Now we're going to go over to answer some questions. Let me just see if I can find the questions now. I got to pull those up. Go over here. And there's the document. Just got to load that. All right. Is it true? This is from Donnie Jennings. Is it true that Russian nukes are under-maintained and not as good as they say? Yes, that's true. Russia has, they say 1,900 nukes, but they say probably only a third of those might actually be functional. Russia has threatened to do nuclear tests in Russia during this war as a threat to the world, and none of those have actually gone off. There was a Satan II missile that they tried to test that didn't have a nuclear warhead in it, but they were trying to test one of their biggest missiles, and it blew up on the launch pad, left a gigantic crater, probably killed everybody that was involved in the test. And so, no, they have not had the money to maintain their nukes in a way that would mean that, but it doesn't matter. If you have 100 nukes, that's enough. You can destroy the whole world. Antonia Flores says, what are the chances of Russia attacking America? As I said, between 1% and 5% that Russia attacks somebody other than Ukraine. Now, I see this going one of three ways. There's going to be a negotiated end to the war in which Russia keeps what it's got so far and Ukraine gets to survive but doesn't get to take back its land. Russia collapses completely and Ukraine just wins and takes back everything. Or I don't see a real scenario where this thing ends with Russia taking over Ukraine, because as long as there are, I don't know, 37 million people in Ukraine, none of them are going to give up that fight because none of them wants to live under Russian control. They're not going to do that. Terry Johnson says, why do humans always want to control other humans and harm our fellow humans? Why such cruelty? I guess that's the fallen nature of man. Live Animal asks, what's the CIA's assessment of Putin's psychological state? There have been some reports, but they're more than a year old, as far as I know, that said Vladimir Putin will go to the mat before he will give up power. And so, you know, he would not voluntarily leave power, but that means that it's probably more likely he would get taken out in a coup. And so I guess that's the best answer I can give you for that. Live Animal also asks, how near are we to a showdown between China and Taiwan? Probably about 1.5 to 2 years. Trumper 2025 says, why do you support Ukraine, which is a communist country? I would ask Trumper 2025, how much time have you spent in Ukraine? I've spent 6-7 months there during this war so far, much of that on the front lines. And I can tell you without a doubt, Ukraine is not a communist country. Ukraine is a very capitalist country. They want to be more like the West. And they're not a communist country in any way, shape, or form. Russia is much closer to a communist country than Ukraine is, without a doubt. I mean, just look at the media that the reporting that comes out of Ukraine. There is reporting coming out of Ukraine that is anti-Ukraine, and they allow it. That reports things that are not positive for Ukraine. Try that in Russia and see what happens. So, Trumper, you're just completely wrong on that. Ukraine is not a communist country. Live Animal asks, how likely is it Putin will be removed before things get out of hand? Things are already out of hand, so not likely. Mark Rhonda Blessing says, is it true that 3 out of 5 Russian nuclear ICBM tests over the past 4 years failed? No, that's not true. Russia has not actually tested a nuke for since 1990. was the last time that they tested a nuke. But they were testing nuclear-capable missiles, and 3 out of 5 of those tests were failed over the last 3 years. One says, if Russia and Ukraine fight for the borders, can't we bring them both into the EU so there will be no more borders? I don't think the EU would go for that. There are some standards that you have to meet as a country in order to gain membership in the European Union. And they have to do with corruption. They have to do with press freedoms. They have to do with human rights. And Russia fails on all of those counts. So Russia's not going to get let into the EU. Sorry. It's just not going to happen. Ginger, Indiana says, you have just made a difference between a nuclear sub being powered by nuclear or having nuclear weapons. Which ones of these subs do the Israelis have? We don't think the Israelis have any nuclear armed subs. So I guess you would say then they would be nuclear powered subs. Betts Killers Anderson says, is Belarus communist on Russia's side? Yes, 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 they are. Edward Sisson says, can Russia continue with 40,000 per month losses? I haven't seen 40,000 per month. I've seen 20,000 per month, and that's been going on for more than a year. And Russia's been absorbing that, but it's getting harder for them to absorb those kind of losses. So I guess that's the best answer I can give you there. Jason Harris. No, that's not a question. KP1 says, do the Russian people agree with this war? And what are they doing? Or is it like a do or like it or die situation? Pretty much. I mean, as I said, the Russians only get access to state-sponsored media or state-approved media. It's very difficult for them to get news from outside of Russia. So the only thing they see is Russia's winning, everybody else is losing. Russia's the good guys, whatever. So most of them actually do support the war. Well, I would say a large portion. What do you think, Rubina, talking to Russian people here? They're not, most of them are not in favor of the war, right? Yeah, because, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of Russians who have fled the war. Over 1 million actually have fled Russia, but hundreds of thousands of them have come to Armenia to live. And if you talk to them, almost all of them will tell you that they're against the war. Otherwise, they wouldn't have left Russia. And these guys are some of the brightest minds in Russia. So Russia has experienced a serious brain drain since the beginning of the war, with all of the high-tech people leaving. Phoenix Design Guy says, are North Koreans still being imported? Yes, they are. Karina Jones, how many of those are North Koreans? About 20,000. Clint Sieber says, how many live Russian soldiers has Ukraine captured, and what are they doing with them? Ukraine has thousands of Russian soldiers that they've captured, and they have them in like prison camps in the western part of Ukraine. And they're actually treated pretty well. There have been a lot of reports. I mean, they will let press into those camps to interview the Russians and to see the conditions, the living conditions. And I've seen some of the videos coming out of there. I've never been to one myself, but I've seen some of the reporting out of there. And they're actually treated pretty well. They're allowed to call home. They're fed. They're, taken care of. And they are periodically traded for Ukrainian captives. Now, Medvedev came out and said, the numbers President Trump, he was very angry when President Trump said that 100,000 Russians have died in this war so far this year. Because again, that's going out, that's going to be hard for Russia to hide something that President Trump said. It was just reported too ubiquitously around the globe. And that is a number that the Russian people have not heard. So Medvedev was very angry at that and said, those numbers are stupid. Just look at the numbers of dead that we have exchanged with the Ukrainians. We've given them 9,000 bodies, Ukrainian bodies this year. They've only given us 200 and something. I don't know if those numbers are correct, but even if they are, you have to understand that if the Ukrainians are slowly withdrawing from their fighting positions, little by little, then the guys that get killed from Ukraine get left on the Russian side and are picked up by Russia. However, the Russians that are dying as they're pulling back are dying in front of Ukrainian positions, and there's no reason the Ukrainians would go behind enemy lines, essentially, to go pick up Russian bodies. So it's only the very small number of Russians who break through the lines and are killed who end up being traded back to Russia. So it makes total sense that Russia would have more Ukrainian bodies than Ukraine would have Russian bodies, just by the nature of the combat that's taking place. Hopke asks, what are your thoughts on Ruddy saying China will ask Russia to help keep NATO busy while they take Taiwan? Yeah, that's been going on since the beginning of the war. Actually, before the war started, only a couple days before the war started, Vladimir Putin went and met with President Xi and of China and said, and they talked about it. And in that talk, the Taiwan thing was brought up, and the Chinese were like, hey, this would be helpful for us if you go ahead with this, and sort of gave Putin the green light to go ahead with the invasion. Michelle Antico asks, doesn't Exxon get their oil from South America, a country that was considered a third world until they found crude oil? Exxon gets their oil from lots of places all around the world. They're in Saudi Arabia, they're in Iraq, they're in Venezuela. So kind of, I guess. But I don't know that those countries in Latin America were considered third world. There really aren't any third world countries left in Latin America. Haiti is one notable exception. And there are parts of Cuba that could be considered third world, but I've been to Cuba and it's a developing country. Maybe not first world, but third world is like living in mud huts with no electricity. So it wasn't that bad in Latin America or South America in most places before oil came in. And Jack asks, did you report on the U.S. veterans captured in Ukraine? I've reported on it in the past. I've actually been out on missions with those guys and have met with them multiple times. I know some of those guys who were killed in Ukraine, some Americans who were fighting there. And what can I say? There are more than 1,500, probably, foreign fighters who have gone and voluntarily joined the military in Ukraine, have been fighting on the on the side of Ukraine. Some of them have packed up and left. New ones come in. They've even had some people from Afghanistan who have reached out to Ukraine and said, we would like to come fight for you because things are really bad in Afghanistan. And we've been fighting the Taliban for years. So we're very combat proven. And we hate Russia because Russia invaded Afghanistan too. And so we would love to get a chance to come fight against Russia, especially for the amount of money that Ukraine is paying for those soldiers, which is drastically more, 5 times more than they can make in Afghanistan, if they could get a job at all. So they were talking about forming an Afghan battalion or brigade in Ukraine, but I don't know what's happened with that. That was over a year ago that I talked to them about that. But anyway, they have, I believe, captured a couple of U.S. veterans. Those guys are going to be in prison for a long time in Ukraine until the war ends, probably. So That's that. All right, folks, thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate you coming on with us. It's nice when we get so many people on a live that isn't about Israel, because I would love to report on a lot of different things. And if you'd like to see me report on different things besides Israel, then go put in the chat what kind of reports you'd like to see me do, or send an email to info@holtonnews.com and tell us what you'd like to see us report on, and I'll do my best. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. I appreciate you being a part of the Hot Zone family, and we will